pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd call on the Reverend Steve Lopez to give us the invocation this morning. Please remain standing.
Good morning, everybody. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we ask for a blessing for those present today. We're grateful that you've chosen to look after your flock. Your word states every good and perfect thing comes from above, and we thank you for our bounty. Precious God, we ask that you continue to watch over the Yonkers Chamber of Commerce. We take nothing for granted, and thank you for your grace. Finally, Lord, thank you for your provisions that you provide us that enables us to share with others so that we may be able to receive your blessings in return, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Okay, you can be seated. Before we even start, I'd like to thank St. John's. I mean, we've been coming here for years. We typically had a debate every year here. Obviously, the past couple of years we haven't been able to, but it's nice to be back, and we thank you. Senator Spano was telling me that we're going to have to come up with some kind of an award for him. 14 debates over 28 years record. I'll introduce the dais. We have our chair, Maura Kiernan, Councilman Mike Breen, Assemblyman Nader Sayegh, Denise Manassas from the hospital, and our own. Everyone in Yonkers remembers and misses Janine on a daily basis, but Janine Rose, very kind enough to come back. With that, I'll turn it over to Denise Manassas for our message from our sponsor, St. John's Hospital.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to St. John's. It is a pleasure to have you all here again. I am Denise Manassas. I am the Assistant Vice President of External Affairs. And one thing that I must do in this role before I do anything else is to thank our dietary department, who worked tirelessly on behalf of our patients and visitors, as well as our security and IT departments for helping to set up this meeting, as well as my own staff who take care of all the logistics and make this possible. And you know, in the time of COVID, this has really become quite challenging for us. So I appreciate all of them very much. They do a wonderful job. And I'd also like to thank Kevin and the Chamber for actually returning to the hospital and coming in and see that it's really not so scary to come back to your community hospital. If you will bear with me, I'd just like to tell you some exciting things that St. John's is now working on. Over the next 2 years, we are planning a large expansion of our emergency room. This might be good news to some of you who have been a visitor to our emergency room, and we know it is an absolute necessity. So we are looking forward to finally having a new facility that's going to meet our community's needs. We are also making significant investments in the future in our cancer program, and we have been also actively recruiting primary care physicians and world-class surgeons in breast and thoracic specialties. They are located at our Boyce Thompson Pavilion, which is on Executive Boulevard and North Broadway. So know that great stuff is happening. We also are renovating our interventional radiology suite. For those of you who don't know what that is, non-surgical interventions like stents and other kinds of closed procedures can be done in that. And we've had that suite for quite some time, but we are actively renovating it. For those of us who live with some level of physical pain, know that we are also a regional leader in interventional pain management. Our physicians utilize implantable devices rather than pharmaceuticals to lessen pain and improve the quality of life. So if you want more information about that one, because everyone I know wants information about that one, just let us know. You can email info@riversidehealth.org and ask me, and because that comes to me, and I'll let you know who that is. How many of you know that St. John's is the only maternity provider in the city of Yonkers? Right. So I've contributed to our 127,832 babies. I contributed 2. Candace back there on my team contributed 3. Greg, you got 2 in? Okay, so you see 3 there? All right, so St. John's is the place to have a baby. So we've recruited some new OBs. We are looking toward the future in all of these efforts to make sure that the community has both the providers and the services that it needs. But speaking of something that's very dear to all of our hearts is the shortage of people in the workforce. That is especially true in healthcare. And so we have long looked forward to see that this was going to become a crisis, and COVID has accelerated that crisis. So what have we done to try and make that better? Well, we have a medical and pharmaceutical rotation for students with partnering with the Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine. We have both an emergency medicine residency and an internal medicine residency. And we have a new dean for our Cochran School of Nursing, and that dean's mission is to increase the enrollment of the nursing school. So if we are getting people from the local communities and we can keep them working in the local community, that benefits all of us. As I said, we have much to look forward to. We're very grateful to our community for supporting us along the way. They really did, you all did come out for us during COVID, and it was very painful and traumatic to be an employee here during that time. And the love and support that came from the community was really sort of awe-inspiring. It was really beautiful to see. And we thank all of you for coming back today as well. Now, it is my honor to introduce a lady who really needs no introduction, Janine Rose. Most of you remember from News 12. She's currently on WVOX on Mondays, and she has been the historical moderator of this debate. And so thank you for listening, and enjoy the debate.
Hey, good morning. That means I'm old. Been around a while. Okay. Good morning, and it is such a pleasure to be back with you today, connecting with all my friends here at the Chamber and beyond. And truly, I've seen a lot of faces I haven't seen for 3 or 4 years, so it's a pleasure. And it is amazing how Denise mentioned how the pandemic has impacted so many parts of our lives, including our ability to gather, even for something as important as a political debate. So today it's good to get back to some form of normalcy and to provide a forum for the business community to hear from both of these very qualified candidates for the New York State Assembly, the Democratic incumbent, Nader Sayegh, and the Republican challenger, Mike Breen. To Kevin Kikase and the Chamber, and of course Denise and all the folks here at St. John's, thank you for this invitation. And a little bit of the history. I am dating myself, but the first Chamber of Commerce debate that I presided over, I've told you this before, was back in 1988. 34 years ago. I always say this, I was 12. I want everybody to know that. Maybe teenager, 15, 16, I don't know. And the first debate was for Congress between Nita Lowey and Joe DiAguardi. I know some of you in this room were there. And since that time, the Chamber has hosted multiple debates for various political seats, as Senator Nick Spano certainly knows. He's been at many, as we mentioned. And once again today, our focus is on the state legislature, particularly the state assembly. And on behalf of the Chamber, gentlemen, we thank you both for your participation today. We're going to start this morning briefly outlining the rules of the forum. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes each for opening comments. After the opening comments, we'll begin our question and answer segment. A candidate will be asked a question and will have 2 minutes to answer. His opponent will then also have 2 minutes to respond to the same question. We're going to rotate the questions, so the candidates will alternately go first and then second, and we'll only ask follow-ups or allow for rebuttals where we think they really are necessary. We'll allow 1 minute for each candidate on the follow-ups. And when we are finished with the Q&A, each candidate will have 3 minutes for closing comments. So I should mention that the questions have been written and formulated by the chamber members. I will only intervene where follow-up questions or rebuttals seem to present themselves. Kevin is going to toss a coin now between the two candidates. So why don't Mike Nader, why don't you stand up? And the coin toss will determine who goes first and who goes last.
As
So,
the challenger, you tell us.
Tails.
Tails.
okay. Oop, well, there we go.
Let it go, let it go.
Oh, it's heads.
It's heads.
So Nader, you can go first, speak first or last, whichever you prefer. First, you want to speak first. Okay, and then Mike, you'll speak last. Okay, so Nader is first. Okay. Mr. Sayegh won the coin toss and has decided to speak first, so he's going to begin our opening arguments. Go ahead.
Good morning, Yonkers. Good morning, St. John's, Chamber of Commerce. Today is really special because we here in Yonkers always need to be aware of what the issues, what the concerns, and when election time comes, we need to recognize and be concerned and aware who we feel best deserves to represent us. I was fortunate as the incumbent to have been elected in 2018, and I got elected because of nearly 40 years of involvement and experience as an educator, as a school principal, as a Board of Education president, on hospital boards, chairing the Chamber of Commerce, the parks. So my experience goes over 40 years of involvement, and coupled with my educational background, my experience as a principal, my legal background, really gave me not only the understanding of Yonkers, but understood the issues, what impacts our kids, what impacts our seniors, what we need to do to address whether it's housing problems, inequity in funding for our school system, whether we need supportive services and counseling for our kids. And I took those skills to Albany, and whether co-sponsored or sponsored nearly 2,000 pieces of legislation since 2018. And I took the lead in making sure that public education was well funded. And we nearly increased funding the last 2 years by $71 million. And some of us may say, well, I have no kids in the public school system. Why should I be concerned? Because Reverend Steve Lopez, who's here, understands, and all of us, that whatever we don't get from Albany, Yonkers taxpayers have to pay, whether you have kids in the school system or not. We have school buildings that are, many of them, as Sally Pinto can tell you, that are over 100 years old in the city of Yonkers. And we've learned during the pandemic how it's terrible.
Mazda license plate KVP 4441 and a white Fiat parked at the salt pile under the ER ramp. Please move your vehicles immediately. That's the black Mazda KVP 4441 and a white Fiat parked at the salt pile under the ER ramp.
Well, but I just wanted to make it very clear. This election, and we've been following the news with the hype, with the division, the polarization in our state and community and the nation, that is being led by radicalism on both ends. And I'm here to tell you, I'm a mainstream resident of Yonkers for over 60 years. I have 5 daughters, all born at St. John's Hospital here. I'm a homeowner, I'm a businessman, so I know what it takes to be what I consider, which is best for all of us, is to have legislation and government that is more mainstream. Extremism on the left or the right doesn't work for us. And today, I know we'll hear about a lot of issues, but keep in mind what our families need when it comes to safety and security and the proper services.
Mr. Breen, and we'll give you a little extra time as well.
Good morning, and thank you to the Yonkers Chamber for holding this debate. I'm Mike Breen, the Common Sense candidate. I've been a Yonkers resident for 38 years, and I've lived in this lower Westchester area my entire life. I've been on the city council now for 11 years, and I'm currently the minority leader. And I've worked tirelessly in a bipartisan manner with Mayor Spano and all my colleagues on the city council to move Yonkers forward. I'm proud of all my work on the city council. And I believe you chamber members, if you look around, you can see the progress we've made in Yonkers these past 11 years. But there's a big problem in Albany. The legislature is more concerned with convicts than constituents. They called it bail reform, but it created a crime wave. It has to be scrapped. But there's other pro-criminal legislation that has also come out of Albany. They voted for raise the age, and literally 16 and 17-year-olds are getting away with murder. They would like to introduce clean the slate and force businesses to hire ex-convicts. If you want to hire someone, it should be your choice, not a state mandate. They would like to pass qualified immunity to punish our police, and it's already been done in New York City, handcuffing our police instead of the lawbreakers. And then you want to wonder why all these cops are leaving New York City? No way will I let it happen if I go to the State Assembly. And yes, 2 of my children are proud members of the Yonkers Police Force. You know, the parole board now routinely releases cop killers. So whatever happened to life without parole? I mean, I don't want to get into a death penalty discussion, but we did supposedly have life without parole. So I don't understand why a family that lost a loved one 46 years ago and finds out that the man that killed their police officer husband is now out of jail and they still don't have a husband. When is enough enough? Violent and career criminals should be taken off the streets. And the primary role of government is to protect its citizens, not the criminals. Albany and my opponent are in denial, and if Albany won't change, then we need to change Albany.
Dr. Samarne and Dr. Bobdi, 4436.
Working with Governor Zeldin, I'll begin to implement that change. So please send me, Mike Breen, to Albany on November 8th. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, thank you. We'll begin our questions now. And Mr. Sayed, the first question goes to you first. I'll read it. The New York State Legislature, and it's part of what Mike Breen just talked about, recently passed criminal bail reform, which appears to have led to significant increase in crime in our region. The governor has claimed that it is the judges who are misapplying the new law, and the judiciary claims the law itself is at fault. Do you support the bail reform law as it stands and as it's written, or what changes do you think are needed? 2 minutes.
Thank you, Janine. First of all, I'm glad we at least cleared my opponent is running with the governor hopeful Zeldin, who was endorsed recently by Donald Trump. So to what I said earlier, this is really a race of extremism on the right that has a goal of fear-mongering and blaming, whether it's Washington or blaming Albany for all the ills of society without solutions. I got to tell you, when it comes to law enforcement, I have all the endorsement of law enforcement agencies and organizations locally and county. Why? Because my track record of working with law enforcement and police goes back for 40 plus years. My family members served as police surgeons for county, local, and state police departments. Bail reform is, in its basic, a very fair process. When 2 individuals have a minor crime, and individuals that can afford the $250 go home to their jobs and to their families, and someone who can't afford $250 stays in jail sometimes 6 months, that's unfair. But when it comes to bail, we stress we stress the need to make sure that judges and law enforcement has more discretion. And I was one of the state delegation members when bail reform was first passed to encourage a gathering of law enforcement officials on all levels and also with the delegation. And changes were made to bail reform that made sure we gave more discretion. People will argue that there's a need for more, and I agree with that. And I would continue to lobby for fine-tuning bail reform, but to take away the fairness and equity of it is really wrong.
Thank you. Mr. Breen.
I guess I'm reading different stories about what's happened because of bail reform. No one cares about the woman that maybe steals the diapers and gets arrested. Maybe she should be released. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people with 60 arrests that are still out on the streets. There's no getting away from that. Bail reform was rushed through Albany, as they do rush through legislation. They never talked to the DAs. They never talked to the police. I believe they talked to the trial lawyers because it works out for them. But bail reform was rushed through. We were at a home field meeting the other night, and there are many judges there running for office, because we got 14 judges running for office. And to a man or a woman, they mentioned they have nothing to do. They have no way of changing that law. The law tells them what they have to do. And it's not the judges. It was set up wrong. It's not been changed in any way, shape, or form. And if we want to talk about that poor person that can't get the $200, I'm with you. But that's not what we're talking about, and you all know what we're talking about. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Breen, this question is for you first. The construction projects in our city are not able to be served by natural gas unless they are designed to be dual fuel so that Con Edison can cut gas service when necessary at times of peak demand. Newly proposed gas supply pipelines have been blocked from construction in New York State, and fracking is prohibited by New York State law. Do you support the current situation, or would you propose changes to the law to allow for greater natural gas supply and distribution to help our businesses?
That's a good one. There was a story a year or two ago after Con Ed put the moratorium in that some poor guy bought a shop in the west side of Yonkers and wanted to cook hamburgers. And I think it was a florist shop. There was no gas. There was not enough gas to cook hamburgers, so he was stuck. The moratorium was a huge mistake, and that was on the previous governor. Then Manhattan, New York City got a gas pipeline just before the moratorium. We were going to get a gas pipeline, and all of a sudden the moratorium went in effect. Con Ed had to react and cut the use of adding new gas service. It's a big mistake. We are awash in natural gas, and we do have a fracking area in upstate New York. Pennsylvania fracks. We should be fracking. Natural gas is a very clean energy. The green people need to take it back and ratchet it back a little. We need natural gas. Wait till we get to electric homes. I mean, I'll talk about it later. We can't afford electric homes, and businesses can't afford to heat apartments with electricity or have dual fuel where they go and use diesel oil, dirty diesel oil, to fire up their furnaces and then when they shut the gas off. It doesn't make sense. We have natural gas. We should be using it. Thank you.
You know, I've always been an advocate of clean energy, and we, for years, have ignored the basic concern about planet Earth. And many of us looked at it as some superficial, well, why be concerned? But I think we're learning, whether we see the daily storms, the yearly major storms, or the climate change, it's really a serious issue. So when it comes to energy and clean energy, I've always been an advocate of let's move in that direction, but let's find a transitional process where you combine clean energy with natural gas and electricity so that as years go by, you know, we can transition into an era where we can get accustomed to clean energy without having the loss of services or the increases of cost. Too often, we try to rush into things, and I'm a big advocate of move in the right direction, but do it in a way where common sense and reasonable approaches is what guides us. So clean energy, like the plastic bag ban and a lot of other issues that we thought were difficult, we now get accustomed. A number of years ago, if we went shopping to Costco or ShopRite and somebody told you put your bulk in a box, you know, we wanted plastic. But we saw what plastic does, and we see the harm that the energy producing fossil fuels have caused. So what's the policy? The policy needs to be transitional, needs to be based on common sense and a joint effort to really work through a process that I consider a long-term goal. Thanks.
Next question, Mr. Sayed, you'll answer it first. Proposed congestion pricing in Manhattan is scheduled to begin in a matter of months, with charges as high as $23 daily for entering the city with your car below 60th Street. Do you support this concept of revenue raising for the MTA? And if not, how would you propose finding the necessary revenue for needed transit improvements?
Thank you, Janine. All of us that travel to downtown Manhattan, New York City, know how difficult it is, especially during the daytime, to go down to Manhattan and sometimes spend an hour to go a 2-3 block area. So I think the concept of finding, you know, a process that allows us to neutralize the traffic jams in New York is a good concept. And I, for one, was a big advocate of developing more mass transportation with Metro North and the MTA to make sure that we make it feasible for people to travel all across our region. You know, and the plans are in place and the funding is in place that would tie in train service and Metro North and other avenues all across the region into downtown Manhattan. Is it a good thing to try to limit the amount of traffic? Yes. When the plan went into effect, many of the individuals involved looked at it similar to paying a toll over the bridge, a $5, $6 toll. But the numbers that are coming out, the $23, the $24, $25 amount, for me is too steep. And I think, again, there needs to be a transitional process where there needs to be attempts to limit traffic into the city, but let's do it at a reasonable pace. Let's make sure people can afford. The last thing I'd like to see is the economy of New York City, whether the theater industry or the restaurants, because I hear a lot of people complaining, hey, if I got to pay $25 and worry about, then I'm not going into the city. Maybe that's good for Westchester restaurants and businesses, but in the long term, it doesn't do us justice. Let's face the reality that New York City, whether smog or air pollution or traffic concerns, need to be addressed. How we do it needs to be done in a reasonable fashion.
I believe they're reporting that the congestion traffic in London is not working. And I believe they've said that there's going to be a problem for the Bronx when the congestion pricing is down here and people are circling around above it. We have the finest subway system in the world, but we don't have any fare enforcement, so people don't pay to ride the subway. If they needed money, why don't you collect the fare? The subways need to be cleaned up and get the people off the subways that have moved in. People won't ride the subways. So now you're going to put congestion pricing in and force them to drive because people are driving now. And as Mr. Sage said, $23 to go to Manhattan, you know, maybe if it was a nuisance fee of $3 or $4, maybe people would pay that. But you're going to have effects elsewhere that we don't understand. So I'm not in support of it right now. It has to be rethought. And why don't we fix up the subways, get the people off it that shouldn't be on it, clean it, have police on it, and get people to go back to the subways. We do have the finest system in the world. Thank you.
It's clear these gentlemen. I'm sorry. Okay, sir. Okay, sir, it's a debate. I thank you. It's just a debate. Thank you, but thank you. I appreciate it. All right, we're going to move on to the next question, and it would be for Mr. Breen first. Extraordinary federal COVID-19 revenues have alleviated the Yonkers Public Schools budget through 2023. We, however, are aware of a significant revenue shortfall beginning in 2024 when the COVID-19 funds expire. The Yonkers Public Schools have been shortchanged, as we know, by New York State for many years. What do you propose the state do to correct the situation going forward and make sure the Yonkers Public Schools are funded when the COVID dollars stop coming in?
Thank you, Janine. The first thing I would do, if I could, is change the so-called formula and go to per capita. Every state child in a poverty situation should get the funding per capita. We all know the story. Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, they get all the money, and we are the stepchild when it comes to giving money out. Yonkers is not a rich city. Yonkers is similar to Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse. You know, we talk about the taxes we're going to have to raise. Just to repeat, Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse don't pay in property taxes and school taxes what the Yonkers residents of Yonkers pay. So that there's a total inequity. And it's not that we don't have the money. My colleague, Anthony Moranti, has drawn up what we call the river. There's more money going to Albany from Yonkers that ever comes back. And over the last 5 years, it's about $480 million. So we are sending money to Albany. We're just not getting it back. And if I could get up there, it's go to per capita, not this formula that's out there. Oh, the formula. Yonkers gets screwed by the formula, as Governor Pataki once said. So the money's out there. We just have to get it. Thank you.
Well, you know, anybody that knows me and knows my background in education, you know, my goal of going to Albany in 2018 was to fix the funding formula. And it's Native Sage that has legislation to fix that funding formula. We recently restored foundation aid so that we brought back services, support services, counselors, psychologists, social workers, music, art, library, and so forth. The funding formula that's based on the wealth of the county puts us in Yonkers at a disadvantage. And I often say we are a community that is diversified. We have a large English language learners, special ed population. That funding formula must be changed. And I got to tell you, from my term as board president to the present, we increased the amount of funding, especially the last 2 years, by $71 million. That is a huge amount of money that fills the gap. We brought in revenue from Empire Casino, MGM. We brought revenue to the school district to alleviate those problems. I will continue to make sure we pass the legislation so that not only the funding, but the renovation of Yonkers schools. Right now, we were getting 50 cents on a dollar to renovate and build new schools, while Buffalo and others were getting 98 cents on a dollar. Today, Reverend Steve can tell you, we brought that up to 71%. Do we have a way to go? I'm the fella that understands education, understands the inequity that impacts all our kids, and I'm the guy that can bring about change. It's no secret, you know, when you're part of a majority at the state level, that's where you can play a key role. To have somebody come who doesn't even have a seat on the table doesn't get you anywhere.
Gentlemen, I'll ask a quick follow-up here. And Mr. Breen, you made the point correctly that Yonkers sends a lot more money to Albany than they get back, particularly those Yonkers Raceway gambling dollars that were supposed to go to education that don't really go there. Everyone mentioned the funding formula, but for years, decades, as we've reported, it doesn't happen. The funding formula has not changed. So if you can't get the formula changed, what is next? A minute for these rebuttals. Go ahead.
Well, again, it should be per capita, but I get the point. Yes, we don't know what goes from the MGM casino to Albany. And we don't know how much money from the lotto comes out of Yonkers that goes to Albany. But if you've ever been to one of these luncheonettes or paper stores, you see people paying lotto. There's a lot of money going to Albany, then we're not seeing it. If we get table games, and you know, Governor Cuomo had a thing about not giving Yonkers those table games. If that MGM casino becomes reality, there's going to be a lot of money in play. That money should be going to education. It's going to be a boost when that thing opens. Hopefully it's opening in the near future. The contract or the licensing, by 2023, all the licenses should be given out. So while we've waited this long, it says by 2023 licenses should be given out. So I look forward to Yonkers getting the MGM casino, and that should be a nice cash flow for the city, and we got to make sure it goes to education.
You know, being proactive, you got to think ahead. And I thought ahead with Empire Casino and MGM coming in my district here in Yonkers, and the impact that MGM with a table gambling license would have on education, on the region, on jobs, on economy was major. I made it my business to reach out and serve on the Assembly Racing and Wagering Committee. And I can tell you that MGM in Yonkers would be one of the 3 gaming license. And what that does is enhances the revenue for education. Historically, through Empire, $19.6 million came to Yonkers. Right away, immediate discussions, we're talking about at least an increase up to $30 million that would go annually to the Yonkers Public Schools, therefore playing a role in alleviating our budget shortfall. And we will continue to make sure that as revenue increases as a result of sport betting, that education gets its fair share. All of us agree we're looking to make sure if you're a big business and you're coming to Yonkers, to the region, you need to benefit our system here in Yonkers.
Next question goes to Mr. Sayegh. New York is among the highest tax states in the country. We are seeing an exodus of many corporations and tens of thousands of high-earning individuals to lower tax states, which of course does not portend well for the future of New York. Please provide some suggestions of policies that can be enacted at the state level to reverse this problematic situation.
Thank you, Janine. New York leads the nation. You know, we lead the nation when it comes to social issues and policy and procedures. When it comes to business development, again, the reasonable approach is what I lobby for and I advocate for. When it comes to business, the goal is to keep business in New York State. And the goal is to make sure that it's feasible for developers and investors to invest and stay in New York, because when you make it unreasonable or you take away the margin of profit they need to operate, you cause concerns. I am a big advocate of making sure we address, for example, housing and affordable housing, but we do so by working with investors and developers to make sure they have an incentive to stay here. Otherwise, we're told by these same individuals and corps that they would go to Texas and Carolina and out of state. So the concern is such where we need to make sure that taxes are affordable. We decrease taxes by $1.6 billion in New York. Many of us that own property in Yonkers and the state have received at least $1,000 in rebates back. This is all part of the initiative to recognize that families, business owners, property owners need to feel safe, and they need to feel that the state is reflective of their concerns, and to give them that tax break so that they can afford their utility bills and housing bills. So that medium is what we in New York need to continue to lobby for, and that is a process that recognizes development, recognizes growth, and works with the developers and investors to make sure that they can contribute also back to the communities. How do they contribute? By making sure there's X percentage of affordable housing, to make sure that they give back to the communities. If they're businesses, they give back to the communities, as we spoke earlier about MGM and UPS and others.
Unfortunately, New York does lead the country, and that's people leaving New York. Recently, at the First Police Precinct Council, we found out they were stealing U-Haul trucks. They were going to U-Haul, breaking and taking the keys. And I imagine they might have been stealing U-Hauls and going to Florida, but they didn't tell us where they went. We have to cut expenses in New York. Medicaid, there's a huge amount we spend that maybe could be looked at and trimmed. Our businesses get rooked by workers' comp. It's overpriced. It should be looked at. If you run a business, you have workers' comp, it's a killer. The state puts mandates on local businesses, on local government. So instead of the state charges you, they put the mandate and make the city pay for it. So these are things that have to be changed. If you want to lower costs for New Yorkers and the utility bills, get the gas back. Get that gas pipeline opened. And you know, when we shut down Indian Point, which we can argue back and forth, maybe it was too close to the city, we should have opened 2 nuclear plants further up the Hudson, hired people, built up the economy, and assured us some low-priced electricity. But we didn't do that. So New York's got to cut expenses and try and get people to stay in New York. And the people that are leaving are the taxpayers. So you're losing a lot of taxpayers.
Okay, that'll bring us to another follow-up. 1 minute, gentlemen. And Mr. Saig, we'll start with you. That's a perfect point about Indian Point. It was closed without lawmakers making sure that there were other energy sources in place. So what do we do now that it's closed?
I mean, to the point I made earlier, how when you deal with energy, there has to be a process that makes sense. And I've always been an advocate of, you know, if you move in the right direction of clean energy, you need to make sure you have in place the resources to make sure you have adequate energy. You know, I wasn't a fan of closing Indian Point without having things in place. And my position has always been to make sure that we have adequate energy sources, but to move in the proper direction. And moving in the proper direction is to really assure us at this point that we don't rush into a process that keeps us at a shortfall. I mean, this goes back to common sense. This goes back to finding a middle ground where if there is a transitional process, you do so in a way that's cost-effective and reflective of the present and long-term needs of energy.
Mr. Breen, 1 minute.
Well, I did mention Indian Point, so we'll go back to it. Again, I would argue that it's too close to New York City, but there should have been a long-term plan, which there wasn't. So Indian Point's gone. By the way, the same time we got Indian Point closed down, the gas moratorium went into effect. So we lost the gas. And now there's legislation that he's sponsoring for electric houses. How do you have electric houses without enough electricity? God created the waterfalls. We can't make any more waterfalls. Solar power, there's a problem getting the solar panels. I'd love to get solar shingles on my house. They don't make them yet, or they don't make them that's an affordable. Wind power, every time you talk about wind, some group says, we don't want the wind in our neighborhood. So solar, wind, waterfalls, it's not enough. We need another source of power. And it should have been nuclear, and it can be gas, but we can't go forward with this policy that's in effect now.
Okay. Last question, Mike, is for Mike Breen. We know that New York homeowners are some of the hardest hit by the SALT taxes, the severe limitations on the state and local tax deductions they can claim at tax time. Although these restrictions were implemented under the Trump administration, Democrats in Washington have done nothing to alleviate the problem, despite election promises to do so. If elected to the Assembly, what will you do to pressure federal lawmakers to act, or at the state level to try and bring some relief to New York homeowners?
That's a good one. I am a Republican, and Trump did a lot of things that I think were good if he kept his mouth. And what he did was salt, and I didn't appreciate salt. Maybe I take it personally. Joe Biden got in, and Joe Biden has undone everything that Trump did except for one item. He didn't undo the salt. Now, I'm a reasonable person. The salt is $10,000. Make it $25,000. I heard they wanted to go to 80,000 or get rid of it. Make it 25,000. Make it 30,000. But you're killing the people in Yonkers with leaving salt at 10,000. So if I could get to Albany and get a message out that we could pressure the federal government to look at salt, it's the only thing President Biden didn't change. And I think when he saw the money coming in, he didn't want to lose the money. But it could be adjusted. It doesn't have to be eliminated, but it should be triggered up to a higher amount, 25, 30. I'm negotiable on the amount, but 10,000 totally is not an acceptable figure. Thank you.
I think all of us in Westchester, New York State, recognize how terrible really salt is for all of us. To be limited to a $10,000 exemption is really unfair. And again, that's a Trump policy, and I myself have reached out to our federal delegation, and they know that for us here in Westchester, New York, that's a top priority. For many people, when we look at $10,000 limit, it really doesn't reflect what the value and what the taxation and the expenses we have in New York. And this was a Trump punishment for what he considered urban states like New York and New Jersey and California and so forth. And this was a policy that, you know, my opponent is right. They get used to the income, but it's really totally unfair for us in New York. And that's something that I'll continue to lobby, but that's a federal matter. Unfortunately, it's not something on the state level we have control, other than to encourage our federal delegation that although there may be less funds coming into the federal, it should be distributed equally across the country. And states like New York, where our taxation is a lot higher than 10,000, should not be limited to the 10,000. It really is wrong. It's a Trump situation, but we got to fix it, Councilman.
Okay, gentlemen, that concludes the question and answer segment. It is time for closing comments. As we mentioned earlier, each candidate will have 3 minutes to close, and as determined from our earlier coin toss, Mr. Sayed, you begin, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Janine. I stand before you as a nearly a 4-year incumbent, and during those 4 years, a track record of accomplishment, taking the lead, utilizing my educational experience, my service on hospital boards, my understanding of healthcare with many families in the medical profession. I understood, especially during the pandemic, when they were talking about the pandemic in New Rochelle, and we're looking from real results that I was getting firsthand from medical professionals in Southwest Yonkers, that the pandemic was harming us and was creeping on us even worse than what we saw in New York City. We demanded, and the state responded by putting a testing site right here at the Armory. And we went further and made sure when many people were scared to go out in public, I took the lead with my staff, making sure that we address constituent services, whether it's handing out sanitizers, dealing with unemployment claims, dealing with small business applications. We were there. We were open for business. We did not hide away because of fear. We stayed active. I sponsored numerous pieces of legislation that impacted not only Yonkers and Westchester, the entire state. The governor signed a gift card, especially non-expiration. Many of us, they get a gift card and it expires, it doesn't expire no more. I sponsored bills and legislation dealing with exemptions on diapers. We talk about the urgency of infant diapers and adult diapers. Yonkers had a 5% tax on diapers. I took the lead with making sure our state constitution has gender neutrality. We took the lead in making sure that healthcare workers were paid proper. We took the lead in making sure $71 million increase the last 2 years in the state budget. That comes from experience. That comes from the ability to reach out and work with local sources. I'm blessed to have had the support and the endorsement of our Mayor Mike Spano, our County Executive George Latimer, our state and federal delegation, our labor unions. We have nearly every labor union, police and fire departments. Why does that take place? Because people recognize that when you send someone up to Albany or to D.C. or to the city council, you got to look at their track record. You got to look at their commitment and their experience and their background and their ability to deliver, because at the end of the day, each and every one of us want to live where there's quality of life, our families safe and secure. Thank you.
Thank you to the Yonkers Chamber of Commerce for holding this important debate. These past 11 years I've been on the City Council have prepared me for my role in the Assembly, dealing with budgets, dealing with legislation, dealing with constituent services. I'm proud to be known as Councilman Pothole. We have meetings in City Hall, we have meetings in the community, and I'm proud of my years as a member of the Tuckahoe Watchdog Group, a coalition of neighborhood groups looking out for our city. And after 25 years, I'm still the Longvale representative on the first precinct community council. You know, I will work with reasonable people. I always have. But we must protect our community, and Albany has radical plans to change it. Most certainly, bail reform is a disaster. But what about comprehensive sex education for kindergartners? It's inappropriate. I wouldn't support it. I know my opponent is. It's totally out of place. Gender ID. Look, I want to be reasonable. But has anyone ever heard of Title IX? Putting boys on girls' teams? The girls need scholarships. And this city is a city of sports leagues, of youth sports. And this shouldn't be happening in Yonkers or anywhere in the state of New York. There are plans in Albany to create a state zoning tribunal to override our local zoning laws and destroy our one-family zones. It shouldn't be. We should be ourselves. We should run our own city. We should be self-serving, taking care of our people, and zoning should not be mandated down to us by the state of New York. You know, and getting back to the gas, people who live in gas houses must vote for Mike Breen. My opponent wants to switch to electric homes. You can't afford it. You can't afford Con Ed electric rates trying to heat your home. The Green Deal is a bit out of control, and it's going to cost you plenty. Reasonable efforts should be made to protect our environment. You know, I only have 3 minutes, so I really got to wrap it up. We need common sense in Albany. We need to get back to basics. If you think Albany is going in the right direction, then yes, you should vote for my opponent. But after what we've talked about this morning, uncontrollable crime, radical changes in education, reversing our lifestyle, you really need to vote for change and a common sense candidate. I'm a common sense candidate. Please vote for Mike Breen on November 8th. God bless the city of Yonkers. God bless America, and thank you very much.
Well, that concludes our candidates forum. I think both our candidates deserve a round of applause. I urge you all to continue to stay involved and follow the issues in all the political races leading right up to Election Day, which is November 8th. Please don't forget to cast your ballots. I know this group is going to vote. And I thank you for being such an attentive audience and for once again welcoming me back. And I believe, do I turn it over to Denise and Kevin?
Yes.
All right, all theirs.
Thanks, Janine.
Before everyone jumps up and leaves, just 2 housekeeping items. If you did not get your parking validation, please stop at the table on your way out. And also, please wear your masks as you make your way through the building. That's very important. Thank you for being with us today. It's great to see you all back.
Okay, thank you, Janine, for the excellent presentation as always. Thank you, Assemblyman and Councilman, for your candor and your answers. I mean, I think it's a very good thing that we have debates and we talk about the issues and where our candidates stand. I think it's very important for all of us. With that, I've just got a little business to attend to. Our next breakfast is going to be on November 15th. We're working potentially to be involved with the Joe Piscopo show, which we had tried to do just prior to COVID. We're trying to resurrect that. We'll stay tuned. We're in the middle of it, trying to see if it'll all come together. As important, in fact, more important, our annual dinner, which is going to be a cocktail this year, is going to be on November 16th, and we have the privilege of honoring a couple of individuals that have had enormous impact on our community, one being our Senator Nick Spano, who's here with us this morning, and the other being Frank Sinatra, who is president or chair of the Sinatra family of funeral homes, and it's a business that's been in Yonkers longer than I have, and that's a pretty long time. Okay, and we also have on Thursday, October 27th, our Women in Business Committee is having a pocketbook bingo at the Fairways at Dunwoody. It's $55 per person. It's at 6 p.m. So if that is your thing, put it on your calendar. I don't carry a pocketbook, but once in a while I play bingo. Okay, we have, do we want to do, we'll do it. Why not? Every month we give away the Golden Knife and Fork Award. Even though St. John's probably has about 52 of them, we're going to give them the 53rd. So thank you to St. John's Hospital. Thank you to Denise Manassis.
Can we take a picture with Mike Green and Nader?
Yeah, if you folks would, we'll all get in.
Let's do a picture.
You want to take the picture? Or, oh, they're taking it. Okay. Patrick will get us.
Come on, Janine. Where are you, Janine?
Come on in.
Come on, we need a pretty face. Two pretty faces, three pretty faces. Talk my way out of that one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and the last but not least, we have the Virginia Eiler Scholarship. It's $135 is the 50-50, and I'm going to have Janine pull a ticket.
Just any ticket.
Any ticket.
Okay, I got it. It's a yellow ticket. You want to read the number?
Yellow.
Yellow ticket 0309676. 9676 yellow ticket. $135.
9676.
03096. There
There
we
you
go.
go, Kelly.
Folks, have a great day. We'll see you we'll actually see you a couple of times in the next month, we hope.
Plug it away. I love my.